I am from Taiwan originally. I grew up in Taipei, Taiwan, and I came to this country in 1991 as an international student. And believe it or not, the last time I went back to Taiwan was in 1999, which is decades ago. So I haven't been back for a long time, even though my family, they're all still there. My mother, who is getting older, and my brother and my sister-in-law. So they all live in Taiwan, and I'm here by myself. What do I remember? I have to say, uh, the good and the bad, but I do remember something. When I left Taiwan, um, I remember at the airport, I'm thinking to myself, and without saying that to my mother, that I'm never coming back. Uh, because that's really important. I feel as much as I love Taiwan, I think in 1991, what drove me out of my own homeland really was my own uh, unhappiness with the gender inequality, where I felt that I was not valued as a girl, I was not valued as a woman. And I really didn't want to have to answer why I don't want to get married, or why I don't want to have children for the rest of my life. And so part of the drive to leave the homeland really is about pursuing, right, my own sense of equality, and to see where leaving the country can take me, right, how far I can go with leaving the country, and really is to carve out a life for myself and a dream for myself at a time as a young woman. So the good things, I miss my family, of course, but at the time when I left, it really was I wanted out of a place that I didn't feel valued, even though they wanted to protect me, shelter me. But really, what I want to do is a place when I can be my own person and pursue my own dream and be authentically me.
Okay. Based on that, why America? Why did you choose America of all places on earth? Why did you?
I think at a time in Taiwan, and that was decades ago, I left in 1991, and that was the particular um, uh, time that the United States, for students in Taiwan, my apology, for students in Taiwan, Taiwan was the place for students who want to study abroad. Now, decades later, students might go to Australia, Europe, but at a time, in the 70s and 60s and 70s and 80s, the United States really was the place. But also keep in mind, at the time in Taiwan in the 60s and 70s, because of the politics, because of the political instability, a lot of people would choose to come to the United States because of the democracy, right? And so the United States at the time, when you witness, right, when we say migration, really is you watch other people. They leave, they go somewhere, and most often times it's a chain migration, right? You go to places that other people have been. And so the United States was the choice. But also my brother, 3 or 4 years before I left, he went to Columbia University and got his MBA in New York. And so for me, it was natural, right? As an international student, I came to the United States. I knew so little about the world, so I simply wanted to come to a so-called free country, right, to pursue my dream. So yeah, that's how I picked the United States, a place I can study, and so there I was.
Yeah. For me, I before coming to the United States, especially as a teenager, I had this vision of America. My vision of America was a place of perfection,
Mm-hmm.
place where nobody's homeless, a place where like everything is easy, no stress, although that began to change as I became an adult, still in Nigeria, but it began to change. But
Right.
when it changed, right before I came, I still had that almost perfect picture of America.
Yeah.
So what was your vision of America in 1991? What picture did you have of America before you came over?
I think it was a very stereotypical perception of the United States as a young person. This is the land of the free, right? This is the land where you can go study. And if you want, you can stay to pursue your dream. And if not, you can come back to the country. You will also know once you get a degree, if you come back, right, people will respect you more, right, in Taiwan. I think a lot of at the time we call the developing countries, we have this attitude and mentality where you go abroad to pursue an education. Then when you come back, you are worth much more. And so at the time, really, it was simply this is the land of free, where I'm free to do whatever I want, right? In addition to pursuing advanced education, it was a very simple idea, right? This is the at the time the beacon of democracy. Really, a lot of the stereotypes and images constructed. For me, as someone living Taiwan and went through the tumultuous political climate in the 70s and 80s, and so you look to the West, particularly United States, as a place, right, to pursue freedom, and so that's really underlie my own kind of in my own dream. Yeah.
Okay. So would you say the vision you had as a place of the land of the free and all the possibilities that you had while you were back in Taiwan, coming over to America, was it consistent? Was there anything that disappointed you? Like for me, it was 360. Wow, this is not what I expected, because I went over to downtown Chicago and Chicagoland area, and there were a lot of homelessness. I never imagined that to be the case. So for you, was it very consistent, the image you had back at home and what it was when you came over?
I think I move around in the United States. I've been here for more than 30 years. So I was in Eugene, Oregon first, and then for my master's degree, and I went to Austin, Texas for my PhD, and I moved to Chicago. And the regional differences really give you a very different sense of the politics and the temperament of the location, but it also give you very different experiences in the politics. When I first arrived in Eugene, Oregon, I would say this, it was actually a great place for me as a foreigner, as someone in the beginning, as a foreigner, as somebody who new to the United States. I would have I would have felt very overwhelmed if I just moved to New York. But Eugene, Oregon, small town, it was nice as a transition now. But immediately I started to learn the racial code, right? Of what it means, right from what it meant at the time and what it means to be an Asian. So a couple of things. I think, when I was in Taiwan, I saw myself as an Asian, and, a Taiwanese. And so it didn't take long, the first few days on campus, I walk around and I started hearing people call me Oriental, right? I say Oriental, Oriental, Oriental. And it really took me a while to understand the difference between Oriental and Asian. and what Orientalism means. You know, as a foreigner, we carry our own understanding of race from our own country. And then once we arrive, oftentimes there's that cultural shock. And then we learn that, right, the racial code. And so for me, I had to really learn, you know, the strict distinction as an international student, but certainly within the United States, I myself, as you know, as somebody who kept on being called Oriental, right? And I had to learn what I meant at the time. And that's how I started understanding the racial hierarchy and racism in this country. And the second thing is, you know, Eugene was a great place. You know, people are nice, but I did have to experience very direct in terms of slurs, right? In terms of people say things to me, and not that I didn't have good experience there, but I still remember being the first year international student, and one day I was walking down the street, and then a car passed by and filled with men, and I'm assuming white men, and somebody yelled out, "You fucking chink," right? And I remember I immediately called, and that was back in 1991, when I don't think we necessarily had a concept of hate crime, or we didn't really think of hate crime as something that you report, or hate crime as something that you have to take seriously, right? It was back in 1991. And I do remember calling campus security, and that I insisted that I wanted this to be on the record. And it was very, and I remember not knowing the history of this country, but I intuitively knew that was something that had to be recorded. And so I do remember, you know, calling the campus security. So you kind of learn through these interactions. As much as I have beautiful experiences with my classmates, you also, through these interactions, learn where you stood, right? Very early on, where you stood in the United States, how people, you know, where you fit in the racial hierarchy. And I also want to mention an incident, various of the incidents that were really important, allow me to understand the presence and experiences of Asian women. In 1991, at a time, there were a lot of incidents where Asian women were sexually assaulted. And at the time, there were already a lot of conversations of how these women were racially targeted, right? And so decades ago, I was already witnessing and experiencing the gender and racial impact and effect of, in terms of the politics here in the United States. So it was a very jarring experience where I had a freedom in terms of to live my life, to be a student, to study, but at the same time, I also experienced this racialized misogyny, but also, you know, racism, and gradually understanding my own place in the United States. And so throughout decades, as I move around in the United States, it's always this feeling of ambivalence, right? Is I appreciate what the United States has given me, but I also feel very ambivalent by some of the negative experiences. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just thinking, you know, you came here all by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So when you came into the United States, you had, you know, there was no one that you knew before coming into the United States.
Mm-hmm.
How did you survive?
Um, Now that's really important to think about the how do immigrants survive, right? And this is what I kind of find when you say earlier, you say the drive of immigrants. And think about when I first arrived, I could speak English, right? My writing was not good. I mean, I could read, and I could communicate. Imagine people arriving here without language. How does one survive? And I really think when you leave your homeland, this is not just moving to another city, right? When you leave your homeland, and for some of us, we already have the language. For a lot of people, they don't even have the language skill. How do they survive? And the truth is, and this really is a testimony of human resilience and capacity. You survive. If you need to point out, you need to. I remember when I went to, I'm going to use an example to, when I went to France, a few months ago, I didn't know French. And I had to navigate the medical facility to get a COVID test. And that was simply COVID test. I didn't know French. I had to figure out, what did I do? Typing the phone, show the other person. They figure out how to communicate with me, or somebody showed their concern when I was clueless and they helped me, or I simply went up to people and saying, what can you help me? Because I didn't know what was the difference. I literally had to function in France, not knowing the language at a medical facility. And that was when I realized how difficult it is for immigrants when they don't have the linguistic facility to navigate institution. And so essentially, is what do you need to do? If you need to get through by asking for help, by pleading others, by writing down and asking for translation, or even your friends, you do it. You do it. And so for me, is this, how did I survive? If I didn't understand, I asked questions. And this is really interesting thing is people think of you in this country. People don't think of immigrants as people with capacity for multiple language abilities. People don't think of immigrants as symbol of multitude. People don't think of immigrants with capacity to navigate different cultures. They oftentimes look at immigrants, these people in this country, as less intelligent because you don't speak the language, right? So I did have to ask people, or I did have to make mistakes, sometimes like an idiot, right? But here's the thing, that's what learning is about. You get through by asking for help. You get through by pleading. You get through because kind people show you how to do things. And so you do have to tolerate that particular perception where people see you simply because you don't have the English ability, and therefore you are not competent or less important, rather than see you as somebody who already speak multiple languages, right? And so I in the beginning, how did I survive? It just, there's no other way. I can't pick up my luggage and go back to Taiwan, right? If I don't understand the lesson, I need to ask my friends. If I don't speak a language, I study hard. And if my grade is not good, I just keep working. And if I feel frustrated, I cry at night. That's how you got through. How you survive is, what's the way out? What's the other way but to move forward and proceed and make progress.
Wow. Wow. So, what would you say was your greatest challenge, your greatest struggle in the beginning, initially, when you came here? You could speak a little bit of you could speak English.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to believe that you had some other challenges. What would you say was the greatest challenge that you had when you started, when you just came into America?
When I just came to America, and I would say this, even until this day, it is still the greatest challenge, even now. And I would say this, and I would tell you, it's not a challenge for me, but I think it's the obstacles that I'm facing. But I have a very different attitude for it. All of us speak English with an accent, right? And accent is not an indication of intelligence, right? But I think in this country, still just very connected to what I said earlier, is that oftentimes people associate accent with your ability, your intelligence, your capacity. So now, language is simply the tool to express what's already in our head. Immigrants, most often time, particularly certain groups, they already have their degrees. A lot of immigrants, when they're here, they have their advanced degrees in their own country. They are professionals in their own country. They're intelligent. They're brilliant. But guess what? They may not speak perfect English. Their degree may not be able to be translatable in this country, right? And so their achievement is not recognized in this country. So essentially, they build everything from scratch. And so, in addition to the race and the gender, really is the first time when you interact with other people. And for me, is you pick out the accent pretty quickly. You can tell that I'm from somewhere, right? And when people see you, somebody from somewhere with an accent, oftentimes that denotes their perception about you, of your intelligence, of what you're capable of. So even if you can have tons of knowledge all in your head, but simply because you express what's inside of you with a different accent, people are going to mark it down, right? They're going to see it as less valuable. And so I think the biggest challenge for me at the time is accent and the way I speak language. Now, so in the beginning, of course, I wanted to speak perfect English, but I want to challenge, what is perfect English? What's the perfect accent, right? It took me a long time to learn this. It really doesn't matter that I'm not a native speaker. I may never get to a point where I can speak so-called perfect English. But then you can look at regional differences in the United States. Who is speaking a perfect English? And so decades ago, I might say, okay, I'm going to learn to speak perfect English, fluent, like a native speaker. But recently, I don't feel that way anymore. And why? That's because I have firm belief, confidence in what I have here. And I realize language is simply a tool. The tool and the substance are two different things. You can speak perfect language all you want, but you may not have anything here. Or you can have a lot of things here, but you may not have the perfect language. The best situation is you have substance, but then you have a way to express yourself. I will tell you why it is still confronting me. And this is a telling example of linguistic racism that most of us who are foreigners, right, immigrants face in the most direct experience. I was taking, this just happened this month. I was taking a comedy class, stand-up comedy. I'm a performer and I have been teaching for decades. I've, you know, now I don't care. This is how I speak. I'm comfortable with myself. I don't have any problem with my accent. And if you don't understand me, I don't see that as my problem anymore. Just like if I don't understand your accent, that's my problem, right? That's because I'm not exposed to different kind of accents. So I was in this comedy stand-up class, and that particular session, there was only one foreigner, minority, me, Asian woman. The rest were all white students. The teacher, white woman. I was in a class, women only comedy class, supposedly to be a safe space for women to learn comedy. And so I did my bits. I say my thing. And the teacher gave me feedback. She was all good. I was taking notes until suddenly she said, the way you pronounce decades bothered me. It should be decades, not decades. Okay? And then she turned to all the white students and say, did it bother you too? And then she went on to talk about the feedback. And it didn't even register with her how problematic that statement was. Like it didn't, she was so comfortable in her whiteness that it didn't even dawn on her. And I thought to myself, did you not live through these past few years of the pandemic and anti-Asian racism? Did you not have to Google to learn about the experiences, what anti-Asian racism looks like, or what anti-Blackness looks like, right? What a privilege not to have to learn anything. And so for me is, I don't, I'm solid in myself. I'm accomplished. I didn't need to show my, hey, do you want me to show you my, right? I'm at a very different stage of my life, but I was dumbfounded by the audacity that at the stage of our development, national, politics, that you don't need to learn about other people's experiences, right? Just like I cannot assume anti-Asian racism is the same as anti-Blackness because they're different, right? You Google, you learn, and so for me, that's at the stage of my life where I'm accomplished, right? I'm a faculty member, and for me to experience this. And so if I were decades younger, I would be like, I need to perfect my English. Not anymore, because I realized that language is simply a tool, and which is very different from what you have here.
Yes, that first of all, I can't even wrap my head around what you just said. Like the way you pronounce decade bothers, the word that bothers me. That I can't even imagine that. It is crazy. And I've heard like several stories, several experiences where people, they have, like you mentioned, they have like these degrees abroad in their own countries. Mm-hmm. They come here and it's just useless. Even I have a friend, he was a practicing lawyer in Nigeria, practicing lawyer.
Yep.
So he came over to the United States and he has like a heavy accent. If you are familiar with Nigerian accent, is really heavy. So his accent is heavy. So when he came over to the United States and he saw how they received his accent, he just advised himself and started afresh. He started afresh from construction. He went to a construction school where he doesn't need to say too much. And now he flip houses and he doesn't have to say all these words. So
Right.
it's really amazing. You use the right statement, linguistic racism. I'm hearing it for the first time. I have to be honest with you. And
it's racism. Yeah, it's racism. But it shows up in that if you're picky about how, I didn't pronounce that word as minutes or years. It's decades, right? So when you're picky about people's accent, is how different ways racism shows up, right? For example, and I thought to myself, you don't say to a student with disability and say, well, your disability bother me. What do the rest of you think? You don't say your particular trait bothers me, right? However, there's something about accent that people, but this is not accent for everybody. It is an accent only for people of color. Because guess what? The accent, the Irish accent, British accent, are accents that are treasured, that are accepted, that are valued, that are seen associated with intelligence. But it is the accent by Asians, people from Latin America, people from Africa, that become the problem, right? So the problem is not accent. The problem is the way that we put accents in hierarchy, and we value actually certain accents, and we devalue other accents, right? So fundamentally, it really is not about accent. It's about who is speaking it. It's really not about language.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm pretty sure if a blonde person, or with red hair and speak Irish, people would say, "Oh, how sweet, how cute," right? How civilized, even without any degree. But for those of us who are highly accomplished in our own country, and we speak an accent that is not valued, right? And therefore, all our accomplishments are devalued. So essentially, really is less about accent or about degree. It really is about what's that in between us. It's us. Because I can also tell you, even if you speak a British accent, people will still look at you differently, right? An Asian person speaks a British accent, their treatment will still be different from somebody, blue eye, red hair, whatever it is, the European, right? Look, they will still be treated differently because there's a perception of a particular physical types that are associated with particular languages, right? So fundamentally, the way we value language is not distinct and disconnected from race, right? And so I find that really interesting. That also tells me that particular kind of interaction in the comedy class, I immediately, I didn't return to the class, and I went ahead to the coordinator for the teacher training, and I filed a complaint. And I said, you are advertising this is a women-only class. Women are not just women. Women are different in terms of their race, in terms of their class. But the thing is, you are advertising scholarships for women of color and queer people. But yet you have a teachers who are only used to one kind of accent, right? And so that tells you, in addition to the teacher who engages racism and microaggression, there's also the structural issue, right? Because essentially you drive out people like me, people who don't look like the sort of young white people who are doing comedy, you drive them out because the hostile environment, simply by a very self-identified progressive female comic who from day one preach punch up, don't punch down, but every step of the way punch down to students. And so for me, this is a lesson. Racism is not just perpetrated by uneducated bigots, white people, or conservative people. Racism can also perpetrated by self-identified progressive liberal people who are unaware of their own bias and are unable to unlearn because they work or live in a cocoon or a kind of a progressive space, and therefore they have their own blind spots, right? So that's something to learn. That is, I oftentimes tell students, education is really not about learning, it's about unlearning. Learning is 4 years, 6 years, graduate school, 7 years. Unlearning is lifetime. And by the time you get to college, you need to unlearn your bias and prejudice. And that's lifetime.
Wow, that's so powerful. You know, if we just want to dwell on this subject alone, it's going to take the whole time. That's so powerful. Going on to the next subject, there are different immigrants coming to America through different means. You came in as a student, I came as a visitor. There are people who come in through the borders, like we have going on right now. So when they get into America, they don't have all the necessary documentation to do what they need to do. There are people who come in straight, and especially I know people, most people from India, because I've had a couple of interviews too from India. They come into work. So how much do you feel like status in terms of immigrants in America affects progression or progress?
A lot. And as much as I, value the discussion about drive and ambition, I don't think we can necessarily dismiss, right? And you have to take into consideration of the structural inequities. And something to really think about, I came here as an international student. Unless you are driven out of your own home country by war, genocide, starvation, it is not the most vulnerable people who migrate, right? It is oftentimes people with resources, right? You can't just travel across borders without having some resources and capital. And we have to acknowledge that. So for me, I oftentimes say this to students. Sure, I work hard. I have worked damn hard in this country, right? To compete in academia, to get my PhD in a discipline that is very American, sociology, to compete in the job market as a PhD, as an international student. I got, the tenure track position, and to get tenure, I had to work really hard, right? To get to where I am, right? To get tenure, to teach, and then now transition to be an artist. I have had to work really hard. I would never say I don't work hard. However, I also say this, I said, guess what? When I think back of my friends in college. Sure, I'm smart, I'm brilliant, but I wasn't the only one who was smart. I have friends who were also smart, intelligent, brilliant, but they may not have the family resources to allow them to come to the United States to study. And I had to consider how my privilege, I'm not, it was my family was middle class, but at least they were able to allow me to come to this country. And I came here with family inheritance to pursue higher education. I do have privilege in terms of class, become a professor. I do have the privilege in terms of education, right? And that's very different. That kind of path is very different from somebody. A lot of my friends, I work with refugees, right? Asylum seekers. If you think about refugee communities, they came to this country without any resources and essentially dropped in the middle of the United States and really have had to survive that way. And the United States doesn't always have enough of a safety net, right? And so that is very important to think about when we look at the United States. What distinguishes one's upward, downward mobility? Generational wealth. When you have generational wealth, that allows you to move forward much easier, faster in life. Without generational wealth, most of the time you stay within your own, right, class bracket. And so something to think about is, I appreciate the exceptions that some of us, right, do work hard and we get somewhere. I don't want to say there's no kind of a very inherent immigrant kind of ambition and drive, but we also have to look at the structural inequities and legacies in this country and how that impacts different communities. And the reality is, I have a lot of immigrant friends who they didn't come here as immigrants, choose making decisions to move freely across borders. They came here as children of refugees, and they really had to make do with the limited resources they had. And that really shapes your whole life path.
Yeah, that's so true. But what I'm thrilled about the most is the desire. Like I said, different immigrants, we all have different experiences. People come in as refugees and all of those things, but a good number of immigrants, in spite of the conditions, they find a way to just pull through, just survive, and that is one thing that I admire. Like you said, in your own experience, there was no other option, which is one reason I feel like immigrants push. Is like a bond bridge. I'm not going back. There's no way I can go back to my country at this point. So I have to find a way, figure out a way to break through and, at least survive. Even though I'm not like hugely successful, but at least survive. And that is the spirit of immigrants that I really admire.
And I want to kind of have you look into, if you look at a history of, for example, Black Asian tension, right? And there has been a lot of a discussion, even the tension between African immigrants and Black Americans. And that's a history I think it's important to. There's a lot of a discussion of, for example, if you look at Asian immigrants, they oftentimes would open stores in predominantly Black communities. And there has been a lot of discussion about how Black Americans can, for example, take loans, right? But yet the government provides subsidies and in terms of loans to Asian immigrants to open store. And so for me, this is really interesting for me to think about. As a sociologist, you look at both, right? For somebody to make it, right, you cannot say it's all about structure. And you cannot say it's all about ambition, because it's an interaction of both. And so I want to say, and I go back and forth as somebody, as an immigrant, is sure, as much as I want to value that I work hard, I think there's also a danger, because of that particular narrative. I want you to kind of think about that as there's a narrative that can be used to scapegoat, right, the marginalized communities in this country, right? When we talk about, I tend to talk about it in a very careful way, right? Is as much as I say, yeah, you just got to survive, because I see that kind of spirit in my own students and in their families, right? Everybody works to support a whole family to make it work. But I think there's also a danger when we say immigrants work harder, that we have a particular ambition. So is everybody, right, in this country. And the truth is that some particular Black communities oftentimes face structural obstacles that immigrants may not face. And so I think it's important to kind of balance that discussion. What I oftentimes I'm worried is that oftentimes this discussion of immigrants have ambition and particular work ethic. And I still talk about that. I really do think, right, you work hard, there's work ethic, and I still pride myself for that. And I do know I most oftentimes pride myself for outworking everybody, because there's a drive. I got to prove myself. I got to show to people back home I made it. That's a really powerful drive. But I also want to be very careful that there are certain structural barriers that I'm not facing. And when I talk about my work ethic and drive, I oftentimes am careful not to become a way to scapegoat, right? Right, this whole idea of the model minority, right? Asians as the model minority will work hard. Oftentimes, that's a rhetoric being used to demonize and scapegoat other communities. And so I really feel ambivalent about it. Is, yeah, I work damn hard. I oftentimes outwork a lot of people I see, and I get it, right? But I also want to be very careful.
Yeah. And that is, honestly, that is a very passionate subject of mine.
Yeah.
A subject that if we go into, we can talk the whole day.
Absolutely, yeah.
The entire day. Maybe we can talk about that after this. And I would really appreciate, because so far you poured so much wisdom. There are several things that I've learned so far from our time together that I don't mind even having, a longer conversation with you, especially about the subject you just mentioned. Yeah. Because sometimes you mentioned that immigrants work very hard. That is not to discount the work of people who are born here. There are people, yeah, native Black Americans, African Americans, white, that work very hard. But sometimes it's also the idea of what is possible. You understand? Like, an immigrant might be here and what is possible is different. Like, I'm working hard, but I have a different mindset of what is possible. Someone else is working hard and also have a different mindset of what is possible. So that could be a limitation, because you're capped at your vision of your possibilities. So if you feel like, okay, this is what is possible for me, you can work hard all you like, but you can remain in a particular space because you don't see yourself going out of that space.
Because you just know, and part of it, I do kind of a look at, when there's no returning, right? I think for a lot of immigrants, even if you return, right? Oftentimes I would say this, after I became an artist, I quit my tenure position to become an artist. It took me 1 year to tell my family, right? I couldn't get myself to do it. And I think and I remember thinking, gosh, how do I explain that decades ago, I traveled with 2 suitcases to another country, right? What do I have to show for? How do I explain that I could quit something that everybody covets and to pursue art, right? And so there's that shame, what, and I was trying to figure out what that shame was about. It really was about when you leave your home country, you don't go home until you're successful, right? When you stay back, you carry your shame until you are ready to honor your family, right? Until you are ready to show off, because it is an embarrassment if you travel halfway around the world carrying 2 suitcases. I believe that 2 suitcases are allowed international travel, and then you make nothing of yourself. You do not go home until you make something of yourself. And when you go home, how do you show that you're successful? And this is trap that we fall into. You bring gifts. And so there's a trap to the so-called American dream.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Like it was going. That was my next question was around. My next. Sorry to interrupt. I'm very sorry. Because my next question was around that. So that's why I just wanted to address.
Okay, go ahead and ask.
Do you feel like that is part of what fuels the drive? Because for me, just like you mentioned, part of my drive is I have to show, if I'm going back to Nigeria, I can't go to Nigeria without being successful. I can't. That's still my mentality. It hasn't changed, and that is part of my drive. So my question to you, my next question was going to be, what was your drive all these years going through, apart from the fact that you can't go back, like literally you can't just go back? What were your other drive was, or rather is going back as a success part of your drive, or showing off to your family part of your drive? Because it is part of my drive. So what was your drive? So you can address all of that now.
So something to think about. There are 2 things, right? And I think those are both very powerful. And I don't want to make assumption. Is Nigeria family very family oriented?
Yes.
Right. And as a man, you also have particular expectation.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So for you, it's not just being a human, right? It's not just you. It's also you being a man. And I don't know if you're the oldest, right?
No.
So in the Asian family, right, it is not just you being this individual. It's also when Taiwanese parents give their children names, those names have certain expectations for their future and career, right? So whatever you do as an individual brings shame or honor to your family. So now think about it, is that we can say it's you, right? Solomon, that you are here to be successful, that's you. But I think there's another part that is really strong drive, and it's an important drive. It's not just you either. Is whatever you do, whatever you make of yourself is a reflection on your family. And to be honest, if it's just you, then that's it. But it really is not, because and that's part of the trap. If it's simply the American dream is for me, why does it matter that I became an artist? That I'm doing something that I like, and that's it. But it's not. I remember when I became a professor, when I tell my mother, my family, she told other people. hey, Shuju, that's my Chinese name. Shuju now is a professor in an American university. That's an honor to the family. And that's really powerful drive. My daughter is a professor. And I can see my mother being so proud, telling my cousins and all my relatives. Imagine if I'm going to say, yeah, I quit my tenure position to become an artist. What does that mean? And so for us, and that's really the tribe, I noticed that in my students who from Latin America, the so-called American dream, sometimes the dream by their parents is so different from their own dream. Right? And so that's the struggle. And I think if it's just my own dream, that's easy. But oftentimes we do things, and that's an exact trap. We do things because we also want to bring honor to our family. When we go home, we want to show off our gifts, right? We want to say, hey, I'm this and this and this in the United States. I make it. And hopefully, this is what I noticed. A lot of people from Asia, I can bring you to the United States. I can support you. Even if you don't want to travel to the United States, I can send you money. And this is very, very distinct in some of the Asian communities. They still send money back home, right, to their family. That's also very distinct in some communities. For example, in Latin America, I either want to sponsor you to come to the United States so you can live a good life, or I'm going to send you money. So it's not just me pursuing dream, it's also you bringing honor to your family. And that's a really powerful drive, but also a trap. For those of us who come here by ourselves as immigrants, because and I think these past few years for me is, what exactly am I pursuing? Is it an American dream for myself, or is it for my family? And it was a huge struggle. But those two things are your individual desire, passion, future, your family honor. You don't go back until you're successful, right? Because not only is it symbolic, but also materials. Some people want to sponsor their family. Some people want to bring back or send back money, right? And so there is that individual family, right? That drive.
Yeah. So, but you mentioned like it's a trap, though. Do you feel like it can be a good trap? A good trap? Do you feel like, because in my opinion, I feel like, oh, that is a good trap. So I'm not going to sit down, even though I'm doing, or how do I put this? I'm not going to rest on anything. I'm not going to be comfortable because it's in my mind. It's going to drive me to be better. It's going to drive me to make success of everything I'm doing, so I can show that, okay, I'm in America and this is what I'm doing. I'm making success. I'm making you proud.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand? Do you feel like
Yes.
it's a good trap?
So something to think about. I would never regret pursuing my PhD, right? I would never regret anything that I have done. So this is oftentimes when I talk to younger generations of Asian Americans, what are they struggling the most? Parental expectation and their own desire and passion, oftentimes two different paths. And this is what I say, because parents always find something secure so you can make a living, right? Education, engineering, medicine, medical, all this. Have a good profession, go to Ivy League education. That's how you move up in the United States. That may not be their dream. But here's what I say to them is, whatever it is your choice right now, it doesn't have to be your choice forever. You just got to be able to brave enough to make a different choice when the time comes. And I had to learn the hard way. right? How did I go from being a professor with a PhD to an artist? Essentially go from, I mean, having condo, respect, status, monthly salary, middle-class lifestyle, to being an artist with a life of, financial uncertainty. And it was a really difficult choice for me to make. But the truth is, I was so unhappy. That unhappiness was enough for me to say, no more. I got to live for myself. And I was brave enough to simply jump. And then I have been fortunate enough to carve out an artistic space for myself. And so what I have told young people is this: especially for a lot of immigrants or second generation children of immigrants, they're grateful for their parents, so they want to live according to their expectations. And I say that's totally okay if that's the choice that you want to make. But I also say at some point, you're going to realize life is short, or life is too long for you to continue to live other people's dreams. And when your dream is calling out loud, be brave enough to jump and to make a different choice. And so that's, for me, is how do you, how do you become authentic human being, right? It's a journey. And if this is your dream, great. And at some point, if you realize it's not, if you realize you will be happy flipping burgers, you simply want to live a life where you can pursue art and pursue your passion projects or projects of commitment, then do that. And that, for me, my artistic journey, when I look at how I became an artist, and I will say this, I told myself I would pursue art the same way I pursued a PhD, right? As an immigrant, right? So it took me 20, almost more than 10 years, 15 years to get to where I was professionally. I thought to myself, okay, if I need to spend 10 years to become a good artist, I'll do that. It's the same mentality. That particular drive we're talking about, I see that in my artistic journey. I'll make it work, right? Even if I'm not speaking perfect language, I already had experience of pursuing a PhD as a foreigner. I can make it work again. And that really was, if I have to struggle for 3-4 years, I'll do that. No matter how long it would take me, I'll make it. And that for me was very distinctly immigrant, right? Because if it's going to take me 10 years, I'll do it, because I have that determination. It really, and that for me, I'm thinking when I compare to myself to my other friends, I think long term. I don't think 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, because I know when I first started a PhD, it's a long-term process, because you have to practice English, you have to get better at reading, you have to get better at writing. It's a lot of patience. You wait for your success with patience. Every day, day in and day out, you work with perseverance, right? That's it. That's the same drive I have pursuing an artistic journey. And for me, that's also very distinctual, very, very immigrant, because there's really no guarantee in your life, right? When you come here, there's no guarantee success, right? It's just not your country, right? You're not necessarily speaking your language. This is not your country. You have to build everything from scratch. The only thing you have is what? Patience, perseverance, determination, and commitment. And you wait. You day in and day out, you do it until you make it. And that's a lot of patience to just wait for that moment. And that's not everybody. But we do it. I have seen immigrants do it.
Wow. Wow, that is powerful, man. So let me try to round this up.
Okay.
Too much of your time, but I'm enjoying this conversation so much. So do you think that there is a difference? There's a fundamental difference comparatively between how immigrants live life in America and how Native Americans live life? Do you think there's a difference comparatively? I know sometimes it's hard to compare. It's kind of broad, but how do you address that question? Although it's broad, but
Good question. Would I have had the same drive if my families are here, right? Somebody, I remember a younger generation of Asian Americans said to me, and he said, my parents work harder than me. And this is somebody from whose parents came from genocide, right, background, were Cambodia, and went through refugee camps. And when they entered the United States, they didn't speak a word of English. Now, imagine you had to adjust, settle, and raise a family under that circumstances. And for them to make it, right? So that's why I always very dumbfounded and amazed by the resilience of immigrants, particularly when they come to this country without being able to speak any language. Now, he said, my parents work harder. And I asked him, I would say, is that really true? And he said, yes. Guess what? I'm thinking about what that is about. Even until this day, I operate on survival mode, right? Survival. And when you first arrived in the United States, I'm pretty sure it was survival for you too.
Yep.
Right? Even if you speak a language, even if you have money, it's survival.
Even till now.
Yes.
Even now.
Now, survival forces you to do a lot of things. And survival forces you to be willing to do a lot of things. If you are comfortable with life, there are things you would say, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. When you have to survive, you do it whether you like it or not. And I would say this, I still have that. I think a lot of the times, good or bad, I'm still in that survival mode, even until now. Is it good? In some way, yes. Because what's my choice?
Wow.
What's my choice? Choice other than working 24/7, working so many years. What's my choice? And I still, no matter what, I think there's a part of me is still there. And this is what I call a habit. It's hard to get out of it. It is going to be with you. And I really think a lot of immigrants, particularly immigrants in terms of arriving in this country, right, is that habit of having to survive, particularly in the early stage, it's always there. It's not a habit you can say, I'm going to grow out of it. Because I see that in myself is you need to prove yourself. You need to be excellent. You need to be excellent beyond everybody else, because you know opportunities are not going to fall on your lap. because you know you have to prove to be twice or three times better to get the opportunities. These kind of like it's in your psyche, they don't go away even after you become successful. And I think, right, intuitively, you have to prove yourself, you have to be twice, three times, you have to be so good that no one can say anything to dispute your success. That kind of a psyche stays with you for the rest of your life. And so even until now, and I could still see myself really operating from survival. And that there is a danger for that as well, because at some point you want to go out of that you want to kind of operate from a mindset of abundance, not scarcity, right? That you have a lot. And so that survival, it's an instinct, it's really powerful, that allows you to do things to a certain point. At some point, you need to figure out how to get out and really cultivate that sense of abundance. And I see myself oftentimes still operate, right, in that kind of a survival, because I know when I learn new skill, what's my first thought? I got to become the best. I got to like spend years, I don't say months, I got to spend years working on my craft, right? I got to. So that ambition, even as I'm pursuing a hobby, I still have that mentality. I got to be good. I got to be excellent. And that's both exhausting, but also powerful.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to process everything that this. I'm so far. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I'm really, really enjoying the conversation. So, let me ask this. There are people who were born here, Americans who were born here, that are struggling. They don't have the drive to do anything. There are Americans also that they're doing, the best they can. They work hard every day, day in, day out. But there are a good number of Americans that are just, man, I'm tired. What is your advice to them?
I am saying this kind of as somebody older. I think if I were decades younger, my attitude would be a little bit different. The way I live my life right now is this, and I find it, I live backward. Meaning, I ask myself, if I were, and I think after the pandemic, it's this. I see so many people pass, right? Life is uncertain, right? There's no guarantee for tomorrow. So I ask myself, and now this is really how I operate. If I were to die tomorrow, what would I have regretted not doing or doing? And I live backward. So I know if I were to die tomorrow, what would I have regretted not doing? Okay. Writing plays, submitting, even if I have to face rejections, right? What would I have regretted not doing? Pursuing art, I'll go ahead and do it. When you learn to ask yourself, when the mortality, right? When the question is on your deathbed, what is that thing that you will regret not doing? And that's how I ask myself, how I operate. If I know I will regret doing this or regret not doing this, I'll do it. And I would say, so I operate basically, ask myself that question, so I don't have regret on my deathbed. And that for me is how I live my life right now. So I would say this, I really have no fear. In terms of if I want to pursue something, I pursue, right? I have no fear of failure. I have no time for self-doubt. I just, that's what I want to do. I'll do it. And my life experiences have allowed me to have a blind faith or faith in myself. I'll make it work. It's just a matter of time, right? As long as I'm still alive, I can make things happen. So that really frees me to simply pursue what I want to do and just do. That's not everybody, right? To succeed, you need to be, it's not just here. You need to take actions. It's the action. You cannot just think about, I want to have 1,000 immigrant project. You need to contact people, you need to do. The doing part is where people fail. They think most people have dreams and, right? Immigrants, we do, because we have to do. And when we have to do, it builds habit. At some point, it becomes instinctual. You just do. And I still have that. That is, yeah. If I am thinking about something, I do. I don't spend time talking anymore, because I know once I started doing, I learn from mistakes and I just keep improving. And I usually give myself years, right, to get to where I need to be. And I don't think short term, I think long term. And so that's kind of how I live my life right now. So actions, that's really the most important thing. Just do.
Awesome. My final question. There are several people who feel like, because I've had conversations, I love conversations, one-on-one conversations. And when I ask people about the American dream, mostly Americans, they feel like, oh man, that's dead. The American dream is dead. Do you think the American dream is dead?
I think instead of asking what's the American dream, I ask what's your dream.
Oh, you're asking?
No, I will ask people this, what's your dream? Right? Because most often time, this is what a lot of my friends, we for those of us who kind of after midlife, we started wrestling about our own life decisions. And we work in institutions where we regret supporting institutions that really don't value us. And most often time, we get into higher ed or corporations because guess what? Salary, comfort, that's family expectations. So I've been talking to people that we oftentimes have the so-called, right, we regret without thinking through what's the American dream. And what I oftentimes ask people is, instead of the American dream, ask yourself, what's your dream? Right? And the American dream is not dead, but instead, ask a different question. What's your dream? Because most often time we think the American dream is our dream, but it really isn't our dream. So ask yourself right from the start, what's your dream? Now, if you're going to talk about structurally and the so-called, picket fence, a house, a family with children, no. Middle class life, no. That no longer exists. If you look at the economy, that doesn't exist anymore. But we can still have dreams, right? And so ask yourself, what's your dream? What is it that you want? And really think about, in terms of what's the price you're paying, but also, right, how does it fulfill you?